kid from the bush who grew into a legend in his own lunchtime, former SAS soldier Michael J. Malone has seen it all. This is Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, hosted by the man himself, Mick Malone, along with Toby Malone, as they examine this long, storied career in the Australian Special Forces. Join us each week for behind-the-scenes insight, exclusive readings, and brutally honest truths from a true original. Welcome to Never Die Wondering. Welcome to episode 8 of Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words, a podcast that explores the life and legend of Michael John Malone, OAM. My name is Toby Malone, Mick's son and co-host of this podcast series, joined by the man whose name is in the title, Mick Malone. G'day, Dad.
Hey, Tob.
How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good.
Good. So we've been talking in the last episode, we're talking about your lead into when you arrived in WA and your lead into the selection course. How is it reminiscing about these old days of the beginning of your military career? Is it a strange thing to cast your mind back like this?
Well, not really, because I'm always thinking about what went before. And
Right.
I never forget blokes' names or places or anything. It's just, they ring me up every day. I get 2 or 3 phone calls a day from old mates to see how I am and all that sort of stuff. And I do the same thing. No, it's just great memories. And I had a fantastic career. So when you're remembering fantastic careers, then that's what happens. You'll do the same when you write your book.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know if I have the readership for my career, but you certainly have talked to plenty of blokes and served with plenty of really interesting blokes. And then, like you've said when we were writing this, when you can't remember something, you just make it up.
Shouldn't tell people that.
It's not true. There's not very much that's made up, but our fact checking department is a little bit lean. So we all take it as a matter of faith that when you talk about stuff, when you talk about a big red kangaroo sitting on the Nullarbor Plain, we have to go,
Yeah,
all right,
yeah.
I assume so. There's that story about that's in Hail Mary the Creek's Up, which is your childhood memoir, which is coming out soon, about seeing a red car. And you remember you woke up you were sitting in the back seat of your father's car and you woke up and asked about the red car. There was no red car, but you can still see the red car in your mind.
I still see the red car today.
Yeah.
I sit in the spare room reading, look out the window, and when I see a red car go past, that's my signal to get my finger out and go and have a shower.
Right. It's a glitch in the matrix or something. So yeah, so last week we talked about sort of how you were getting to the Cadre and the dread of what it could be, whether it was going to be as scary as you thought it was going to be, and then you got there, and then it turned out that everyone was pretty nice blokes, and the accommodations at Campbell Barracks weren't too bad, and you were ready to go. So but you were in a place where you didn't know anything about, and you're about to head to Collie in southwest Western Australia to get given the rounds of the kitchen by the selection course blokes. This is an interesting chapter because this gives some real insight into your memories of going through this, and for blokes, people who haven't been through the selection course, which is most people, this is probably a fairly mysterious process and something that people don't read much about. So this has been one of those chapters that people have responded to quite well because there is not as though there's a manual that says this is what will happen on the selection course. So it's a great historical document. So why don't we get into reading this next chapter?
All right.
So today we'll be reading chapter 6 of Two Ranks on the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone, OAM, published in 2024 by Imprimatur Books, Perth. This chapter, entitled SAS Cadre, Collie, covers pages 41 to 54 in the print edition. The ebook may have a slightly different numbering, so follow from the beginning of the chapter. As we read, the body of the text will be read by author Mick Malone. Whenever we come across a footnote, we'll pause in the least disruptive way possible, and I will read the footnotes. And now, without further ado, Two Ranks on the Road.
Chapter 6, SAS Cadre, Collie, 1967. Hard graft. Our group consisted of blokes from all states, as opposed to my father's mob in World War II, where everybody came from the local area. It was an eclectic bunch, and it looked like it was going to be fun. We stayed in East Block for about a week while we waited for all the Carter staff to come back off leave. We were to have completely 3-squadron staff of older grizzled sergeants and corporals. The chief instructor was Major Wally Marshall, MM, who served in one of the independent companies, 2nd 4th Commando in Timor, and was a lovely man who treated us with respect and good humour. Jock Thorburn was a senior instructor, senior NCO, with Tom Hogg, Chris Jennison, Clem Dwyer, and Des Kennedy, MM, who were the men from which we would be learning the introduction to SASR. They were all Borneo and Vietnam veterans and knew a thing or two about the bush. Life in that first week was pretty laid back. Where we were introduced to all of the amenities Campbell Barracks had to offer. The bulk of the area below East and West blocks was a large construction site with brand new barrack blocks being built. The future parade ground was under a vast hill of sand, and given the torture that parade grounds promised, I hoped it would stay there. We were marched around the place past the 5-camp hospital nurses' quarters in an old house.
Footnote. Now the headquarters of the SAS Association WA branch.
The RSM's house.
Footnote. Now the SASR Ladies Auxiliary House.
The various houses in the polygon. The officers' married quarters, and the old gym, which had doubled as a hall and picture theatre since World War II. The Gratwick VC Club, or Diggers Boozer, was up on the hill behind RHQ in another World War II building. The Gratwick Club was named for Percy Gratwick, VC, who was killed in action in Alamein in the Middle East in World War II. You with me?
Footnote. Gratwick was a 40-year-old private and former gold prospector from Katanning. Gratwick's VC action was inspiring, as the Australian War Memorial commemorates. On the night of 25-26 October 1942, in an attack on Trig 29 west of El Alamein, Gratwick's company suffered heavy casualties and was held up by intense enemy fire. His platoon lost its commander, its sergeant, and most of the men. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, Gratwick launched a single-handed attack with grenades, rifle, and bayonet on the German posts. He finally fell to a burst of machine gun fire. His lone efforts had a big impact, inspiring all those around him and enabling the company to advance. Gratwick was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross.
Well done, Percy. RIP. The officers' mess and sergeants' mess were co-located in another old building, and the Q store was similarly placed. There were 3 chapels side by side, those for those inclined. We were introduced to 1, 2, and 3 squadrons, 3 and 4 squadron headquarters, which lined the back road to the north of the camp. Old World War II wood and iron buildings from a bygone era. The rugby and Aussie rule stables were located to the west of all the buildings. Then Jock Thorburn appeared in East Block yelling, "Pack up your stuff and be on the road in 3 ranks in 15 minutes. A mad flurry ensued out on the road, where we were told we would be moving to more salubrious accommodations. God. Quick, march. We marched down the road past the old gym, RAP and Q store, past the squadron headquarter buildings and out onto the rifle range road to an old building which was once accommodated the range staff. Consisted of 4 rooms equipped with army beds and mattresses. We gravitated towards our mates and started to settle in. But before we could, we were introduced to the ablution block, which of course had to be scrubbed out. The World War II Army green paint was lifting off and there were holes in the asbestos roof. We would make the most of this place for the next 2 weeks. Sergeant Chris Jennison, an old ex-Brit who had done tours of Borneo 1 Squadron and Vietnam 3 Squadron, was a balding, chain-smoking Yorkshireman with a friendly bent. He would come into the lines early in the morning and get us out on the track for the morning gallop down to the stock butts and back. After half an hour of obligatory calisthenics, we were released for showers, which is the best thing about this old barrack block. The shower was like a waterfall. By 7:30, we would again be on the road in 3 ranks for the march up to the diggers' mess for breakfast in the typical bain-marie style, self-serve, allowing us to load up with everything on offer. And load up we did. It was interesting to see the cooks behind the serving point in their sandy berets on a jaunty angle, of course. We placed our plates and KFS in the trays provided. Fancy not having to wash your own plate. We headed out. Dress of the day was greens, AB boots and gaiters with black berets with the RAF badge or other corps badges as applicable. Back in our bolt hole, Sergeant Jennison sat us down on the veranda and just talked all things SASR. He explained the rank structure in the unit, squadrons, not companies, troops, not platoons, patrols, not sections. Each squadron was commanded by a major and a captain 2IC, lieutenant, each officer, and lieutenants or second lieutenants as troop commanders.
Footnote: lieutenants were generally Duntroon graduates, and second lieutenants were from either Officer Cadet School, OCS Portsea, or Officer Training Unit, OTU Shayville, reserved for national servicemen.
Shayville.
Okay. Reserved for national servicemen.
Yeah. Patrols were normally led by sergeants, and a few were led by officers and corporals. The more he talked, the more I realised we were in the deep end, playing with the big boys. Wasn't that the truth? 2 squadrons preparing to go on active service to Vietnam in 1968, in relief of 1 squadron. At this stage, we would be joining 3 squadron on completion of the Cadre if we got through, and parachute course. 3 squadron would replace 2 squadron at the end of their 12-month tour. That was our aim, to be there when the whips were cracking. I was rapt because it would give us plenty of time to learn all the stuff needed to stay alive in the sharp end. After a week of this, trucks turned up outside our block. We were warned to have all our goods and chattels packed ready to go, and most of us had only our kit bag, webbing, and rifle to worry about. We'd be joined by a few more blokes, and 26 of us boarded the trucks for an unknown destination. The trucks drove out the back gate and headed south. I had no idea of the geography as we rolled along the beach road, Marine Parade to Fremantle. We turned slightly inland and kept going south. By this time, it was getting a bit brisk, and everyone dragged out their khaki jumpers, and some had their greatcoats. After about four hours, we turned off the main road and glimpsed a sign pointing to Collie. I had no idea what this place was, except that it was somewhere in WA. The truck stopped and we all got off with all our gear, waiting for the next order. "Righto, you blokes, follow me," said Jock, and away he went at a fast crack. All we could do was lump our kit bags with over our shoulders whilst wearing our webbing, pack and rifle. We stomped about 4 miles till we came to a side road with a sign that says Collie River, 5 miles. We trudged down this dirt track for a few hundred metres till we came to a small gravel quarry where army tents had been pitched. A chuffer was fired up and there were quite a few staff there. Okay, you men, welcome to your new home for the immediate future, said Jock, the SI. Over there, you'll pitch your one-man tents, take a stretcher off the pile, and get settled in. Dinner is just about ready. We noticed there was a rudimentary shower rigged up between two trees, but there was no latrine. We would have to dig that before we could eat. Shovels and picks magically appeared, and we got stuck into it. It wasn't long before we were down at 4 feet and long enough to accommodate the 3-hole planks, while a Hessian screen attached to star pickets rounded off the job. The wash point was then under siege. Back to our tent line, it wasn't long before everyone had their tents up, luckily so, because it started to rain. We had a big tarp fly over the kitchen, complete with large FS tables with 2 cooks behind the jump, dressed, of course, in bush greens and sandy berets. It was pretty good feed for a bush banged up job, after which we scrubbed our dixies and headed off. 30 minutes later, we were called back to the kitchen tent for a briefing on what we were and what we would be doing. Jock started by introducing all the staff: Chris Jennison, Tom Hogg, Des Kennedy, MM, Blue Causton, who we met at the train on day 1, John Robinson, Clem Dwyer, and a couple of corporals who had driven us down here, Jock said. Jock said, welcome to the Collie training area. You're home for the next little while. While you're here, I expect everyone to pull their weight, help each other out, keep your rifle extremely clean and oiled. The dirt road you came in on over there leads down to the Collie River, with which you will be extremely well acquainted in no time at all. You can build a fire over there near the latrine and go to bed when you like. Stretchers are over there. Grab one and assemble it at Ravelli. Ravelli will be at first light. Make the most of the time between now and then. Off you go. Most of us had never seen a stretcher of this type, let alone assemble it, but it wasn't long before we figured it out and helped each other. We carted our stretchers to the tent lines, plonked them down inside, and quickly made ready for bed. Our sleeping bags weren't much chop, so most of us slept in all our clothes plus a jumper, as boots were the only thing removed. It wasn't long before a cacophony of snoring rose from the exhausted course. The staff made themselves comfortable around the fire and talked. The last thing I heard was, Des, you okay to do Ravelli? At first light, we were woken up by an almighty explosion. This was Ravelli, Des style. He let off either a slab of TNT or threw a whiz-bang about 100 yards away in the bush. Get out of here, you lazy bastards. 2 ranks on the road with your rifles and boots on. A mad flurry ensued, and it wasn't long before we were all out there, shivering in the morning cold. Fog had settled down on the bush, and we could barely make out the 2 tyre tracks which constituted the road. Okay, let's go, called one of the instructors. And away we went, 2 ranks down this quite steep hill. It wasn't long before we were gasping, and the pace did not let up. We ran for 30 minutes and never saw the river. That'll do. Suck in some big ones and turn around. And away we went again, this time uphill. Luckily, we were young and fit enough to handle this. We stopped and did push-ups halfway back. This was also okay. We picked up again and the pace increased. The rifle was starting to weigh a ton, but that was okay too. Down for another 20 and then off again. By this time, most of us had a heavy sweater, although it was drizzling rain. We ran on again, and there was the camp, which we greeted with some relief. Clean your rifles, wash up, and then's breakfast. Couple of pull-throughs, a lot of oil, and the rifle was done. We put slings on them and slung them over our backs. Breakfast was a very welcome sight. Grumpy had cooked a mess of scrambled eggs, bacon, and baked beans. We had 30 minutes to eat and bash our dixies before heading back to our tent line to square the hoochie away and report to a jerry-rigged instruction area, the back of the mess tent. I don't really recall what we learned that first day, but it included rules, navigation, weapon handling, and safety, medical aspects, including the health of our feet and crutch chafes. We remained in the section patrols we were put in back at Swanbourne Range, and Chris Jennison was still our man. I think we had the best deal because Chris was there to teach us, not fuck us around. A couple of the other instructors were tyrants in their approach, and I didn't envy not being in their patrols. The ubiquitous Green Army notebook, GAN, made its appearance this first day, and we were mindful to write down as much data as we could. We knocked off for a welcome brew, Mornos, in our steel mugs, and Grumpy had conjured up rock cakes on his army bush stove. Lovely. Then it was back into it. Lunch came and went, and then we had our weapons inspected before again falling in on the road. A half hour of stripping and assembling and an intro to the 9mm Owen machine carbine, OMC, made famous in the jungles of New Guinea in World War II.
Footnote, we first encountered this weapon at Kapuka, but never fired it.
We would get to fire this little beast in sneaker ranges, set up down the hill later in the week. Other weapons were ones we already knew about: 7.62 GPMG, M60, the grenade launchers, 40mm M79, and of course the fragmentation M26 hand grenades. We stripped and assembled and cleaned all these weapons except the grenades, of course, till our hands bled and we were very familiar with them. Again, we stopped for a brew. No rock cakes this time. We were issued with prismatic compasses and told to familiarise ourselves with them, and then as we'd been introduced to these at Kapuka and Infantry Centre, it was no biggie. We were also issued 1:25,000 maps of the Collie training area. Both these items would be well used by the next 2 weeks. The meal that night was a serious combat stew, as Grumpy called it. Then it was bash your dixies, sit around the fire for a little while, with time to sit on the dunny to try and loosen up the army food. The 3-seater worked well, and it was a good place to have a yarn. I could hear a generator start up just on dusk, and suddenly the camp was bathed in light, so the old hurricane lamps hanging in the trees were no longer required. The camp staff had been busy while we were out doing stuff. There were 26 of us on the course, and we were nearly outnumbered by the staff. A comm centre was set up, talking back to Swanbourne. A heap of radios, ANPR C25 sets, with batteries and aerial releases were unpacked off a truck. These radios would be issued to us tomorrow. We slept like logs and were awakened by the same method, a slab of TNT, courtesy of Des Kennedy. This time it was Tom Hogg yelling at us as we scrambled to get out our boots on, grab our rifles and get out on the road. But this time there came a voice from our ranks and yelled back, "Fuck off." It was an artillery cove named Larry. We galloped up.
For footnote, where necessary, names have been removed to avoid embarrassment. Larry's last name is censored here.
I ran into him in Vietnam, actually. We galloped off and did our usual run down the dirt track, this time going all the way to the Collie River Bridge. We halted there to catch our breath and do some physical jerks before forming up again back on the road. It was hard graft, that uphill run, I can tell you. When we got back in a complete lather, we noticed D's, Hoochie, and bed space were gone. He had been unceremoniously sacked and sent back to Swanbourne. We never saw or heard of him again. Jock, the SI, came and said, "That's what happens to gobby bastards, so take note." We were pretty stunned, but understood. No one wanted to be the next to be shown the door, so it was heads down and bums up. After washing up and breakfast, we sorted our bed spaces. We sorted our bed spaces out and reported to the Q store, where we were all issued with a 25-set radio and CES complete equipment schedule. At the instruction point, we sat down with our radios and followed the signals instructor in how to fit the battery and small whip aerial. The frequencies were explained, and we took turns speaking to the instructor in signals jargon. 1-2, this is 3-2. Radio check over. We were then issued a plastic card with call signs, frequencies, and the rest. After a couple of hours of this palaver, we were again in two ranks with the radios on our backs, along with a ration pack. We were off on a navigational march to 4 checkpoints, at which we were to call up the base and report in. The legs are about 500 metres each on a particular bearing. Next bearing would be issued by the staff manning the checkpoint. We were issued maps of the AO and a list of the legs, and would be dropped off in groups of 5 at each checkpoint, with a view to starting each leg 10 minutes apart. The main thing was to ensure we did it on our own. It was inevitable that some would be faster than others and would catch them up. But if this happened, the catcher would stop and have a rest, and the catchee would get his finger out. There would be a medical kit with each of the staff at the checkpoints in case anyone injured themselves. We were dropped off randomly and set out on the first bearing, which we had to work out ourselves. Once satisfied we knew where we were going, we headed out. The first leg I was on was purely scrub bashing with no visible landmarks. This could end badly. The only other navigational training we had was rudimentary sessions we'd had at Kapuka and the infantry centre. This was a bit more realistic. Paces were a vital element in this navigation. If you kept paces, you could tell how far across the map you'd come, and as long as you stayed on the bearing, everything would be fine. I had no problem hitting my first checkpoint, as it was on a track junction. The second wasn't as easy, as it involved crossing a river. Slightly downstream, there was an ideal crossing point. I just had to adjust back onto my bearing. I hit the second marker with ease and passed 2 other blokes off on the left. The third leg was simple, as was the fourth and the final leg. Before I knew it, there was a truck waiting on the track ahead. I thought it was one of the first in, but no, there was about half the course already in. No problems. We got there in the time allocated. We waited for an hour, and we were still missing 3 blokes when the allocated time was up. A roll call determined who they were, and it wasn't long before 2 staff trudged off to find them. When they were gone, a Land Rover pulled up. The light was fading quickly by the time they all trudged in. There was still quite a bit of kayaking going on. Loaded up, we headed back to camp. We repeated the exercise twice more, and by that time we were all fully honed up in map reading and navigation. Back at camp, we were really looking forward to a hot, grumpy stew. But rifles had to be cleaned first, of course. Down to the mess tent to load up with stew and bread, the soldier staple. After dinner, we had half an hour before we had another lesson, this time a medical one. It covered all the nasty soldiers faced in the jungles, whether it be New Guinea or Vietnam. Malaria from Mosquitoes was a big one, along with the drugs used to combat it. Waterborne leptospirosis, snake and bug bites, and the care of feet in the tropics were all important aspects covered. That night we slept the sleep of the dead, being a group of serious smartasses. Many of us set out our brain timer across on the forehead. I still do that today. To try and be awake and out of bed before Des inflicted his mayhem first light. Sure enough, up she went, the big bang. The way we were going, we would be shell-shocked, Carter, and not much use to anyone. Out on the road in two ranks in the rain, we headed off down the hill with a spring in our step. This shit was becoming easier by the day. All the way down to the bridge. But this time we didn't stop there. We ran a few hundred metres up the hill on the other side. We were gasping, till we were gasping. The staff relented and we stopped for a few breaths and 50 push-ups, then back to the camp for breakfast. The rain was relentless, although not as heavy as it was at first light, pulling rifles through and with a smattering of oil, and it was wash-up time before breakfast. Grumpy had excelled himself with a big pot of scrambled eggs and bacon, sausages and bubble and squeak. The coffee was also most welcome. 6 blokes were nominated to bash the Dixies, while the rest of us went back to the lines to sort out our clobber. Tomorrow we would start on the live firing sneaker ranges using the 9mm Owen, but a strip and assemble class was first, of course. Most of us were quite familiar with this weapon, having used them at Kapuka and Epicenter. There were 2 sneaker ranges, one on each side of the road. They were set up with dart system. What's DART stand for? Anyway, the first we'd ever seen of this technology. From the start point, the firer would load the Owen with a 20-round magazine, apply the safety and wait for orders. On command start, the firer would cock his weapon and step off into a lane cut through the bush with the instructor right behind him with the dart controller. The darts were set up with a variety of figures, figure 11 and MG targets, which would pop out randomly from behind trees, mounds of earth, and the like. 20 rounds for 10 targets. We got 3 go-throughs and scores were tallied up. And out of the 12 in my group, I scored in the middle. Chris Jennison came up to me when the lunch was which vehicle arrived, and advised me to relax and enjoy it. The group swapped after lunch and we started again. I heeded Chris's advice and did a better job on the second course. Late in the afternoon, we spent an hour picking up brass, loading the trucks with stores and weapons, and heading back to camp. All the Owens had to be cleaned in a bath of range fuel and oil before dinner and inspected before they were handed back to the Q-Star. Dinner was quite a jolly affair as everyone was pleased with their range efforts. Jock came in and announced we would be doing the ranges again tomorrow, this time with SLRs. As was always our primary weapon, we understood the importance of accurate shooting at close range. Chris had spoken to our patrol at some length on operations in jungle and the need to remain switched on. Des again performed his waking ritual, but this time we went straight to breakfast. We had a big day ahead. After breakfast, we were to grab our rifles, webbing, 3 magazines, rifle cleaning kit, extra 4v2, and form up on the road in 2 ranks. We jogged down the hill to the sneaker ranges where the the Kiwis had set up an ammunition point. We were issued 60 rounds and formed up on the road, ready to run down to the sneaker ranges. At the sneaker ranges, we peeled off into two groups, one for each range. This time, concurrent training was organised to occupy those not in the lanes with something constructive to do, which was, yes, stripping and assembling. When it was my turn to shoot, I grabbed my webbing and rifle and moved down to the start point. This will be a doddle, I thought, but no, the sneaky bastards had moved the darts to new positions. Instead of coming out from this tree, a target emerged from a different tree, and this went on for the entire lane. Not bad, though, didn't miss any, although others were not so fortunate. It was quite an effort to identify the target, safety catch off, rifle to the shoulder, apply safety and prepare to move on. The SLR, 7.16mm, was a different beast at close range, close quarters. Tomorrow would be firing the M16, a smaller caliber 5.56mm, and much lighter, both with 20-round magazines.
Footnote, 30-round mags were not available in Australia, but the squadrons had access to them in Vietnam.
We stopped for lunch and a brew, and each of the patrol instructors took us off to the side in our patrols to talk about how things were going. Rod Wallace, G.D. Smith, Locker Bilborough, Alzo Ingram, and I had the benefit of Chris Jennison's erudition and experience to put our training into perspective. He was a calm and friendly man who made it clear he was there to teach us. There were lots of laughs too. Okay, let's go, Yell. And we packed up our lunch debris, grabbed our rifles, moved back to the centre and changed over to the other sneaker range. This time we would move through, firstly with the SLR and then the M16. Scores would be tallied and debrief conducted. Once all this was complete, we stacked the M16s in the truck, slung our SLRs and formed up on the road for the stomp back to camp. We set off at a savage pace, and in no time we were back there. All the weapons had to be cleaned before we could do anything else. The half 44-gallon drums were ideal weapon bars, and there were 6 of them set up. As each M16 was cleaned, we presented it to the Q Waller for inspection. If he was happy, he checked off the serial number and stowed the weapon in a large trunk. Magazines were similarly inspected and placed in stacks in another trunk. Then it was into our personal weapons, the SLRs. These were inspected by our patrol instructors, and once satisfied, we could return to the lines and prepare for dinner. A good scrub at the wash point made a hell of a difference. Grumpy's commando stew was again in evidence, and we ate heartily. After dinner, we had to attend a lecture on mines, mine warfare, and booby traps. Some of the instructors had personally experienced of mines and booby traps in Borneo and Vietnam, and were very keen to learn about booby traps around enemy bush camps and tracks, which was the point of an SAS reconnaissance patrol was most vulnerable. We were taught what signs to watch for and the evidence of fire lanes. Moving very slowly through the bush was the key to silent recce patrolling. Add to that the camouflage, lack of noise, such as clanking of metal parts and talking, crossing of tracks, removing any evidence of patrol who crossed there, and of course acute hearing and hand signals. This was the meat and potatoes of what SAS was all about. We were all keen to prove we would be very good at these things when the whips were cracking. After sleeping soundly, we welcomed a rainy day with Des's wake-up call. Quickly out of the fada, boots on, rifle slung, and out on the road. It had rained quite a lot during the night, and the dirt road was quite slippery. Most of us had tractor treads on our AB boots, which were very handy in the muddy conditions. It wasn't long before we was wet as shags, but the pace never let up. We turned around just short of the bridge and headed back with no push-up this time. They're going soft, we thought. Back in the lines, off with the wet clothes and into dry stuff, along with warm jumper. Most of us wore a jumper next to the skin with the shirt over the top. A good woolen jumper was the perfect solution in the cold settling into the bones. Perfect antidote to the cold settling into the bones. We were allowed to wear smock psychological, the army raincoat, so named because of its inefficiency. Around the lines of breakfast went down a treat. It was heavy, hot porridge, just a shot on a day like this. A couple of cups of coffee and we were ready for whatever they planned to throw at us. First up was a lecture on why we were in Vietnam, as most of us younger blokes had never given this much thought. We were all ears. It was all about the communist North pushing south, pushing against the capitalist South. I knew about the communist North in Korea doing the same thing, and as leader of the free world, America convinced the UN to go in and try to kick them out. The Korean War was an inconclusive bloodbath, and we hope that Vietnam will not go the same way.
Footnote. We lost 340 soldiers and airmen killed in action in Korea. As the Australian War Memorial commemorates, quote, over 17,000 Australians served during the Korean War, of which 340 were killed and over 1,216 wounded. A further 30 had become prisoners of war. And that's quoted from the Australian War Memorial website.
The difference between the two was the UN stayed out of Vietnam. American allies included the host, South Vietnam, Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, South Korea, some Philippine troops, and that was about it. The Europeans, the Brits, the Canadians, and others stayed out of it. It was a useful lecture to young blokes with scant knowledge of world politics. Politics in Australia were similarly divided, with the Socialist Labor Party wanting nothing to do with the war, whereas the Liberals under Bob Menzies fully supported the American push. They held to the proposition of the East Asian nations would succumb to the domino theory, which had already witnessed in Europe after World War II, when many nations fell to the Soviets. The world was quickly divided into socialist, oblique communist on one side, and the free world on the other. And we certainly knew what camp we were in. It would fragment our society down to families even for the duration of the Vietnam War. That, however, was no concern of ours. We were champing at the bit to get over there and do our bit as our fathers and our grandfathers before us. We understood we were attempting to join Australia's premier combat unit and would have our wits about us for the rest of the course. We weren't sure of the selection procedure from here on. Did they have a quota select, and would the axe fall? We had bonded pretty strongly by this stage, but knew perfectly well we'd only so far scratched the surface. There were a few slackers among us, and they were identified pretty early in the piece, who got them aside and gave them a seeing to. Most of these blokes were non-infantry, ordnance transport signals, and were cut a bit of slack accordingly. My good mate, Craig Bramley, and Bart Maverick looked a bit worried, but they would be okay. Stanley Ockerbilbro, ever the larrikin, would have been on wood for his skylarking, but it was important for the morale of the rest of us, and Chris Jennison was fully aware of this. Right. The worst thing about Collie was that we had no concept of duration. How long we were down here, and when do we go back? Scuttlebutt said we'll be here for a few more days, and then we'll be off to Bindoon Ranges, wherever they were. Are they mountains or weapons ranges? We would no doubt find out soon enough. The staff were being very tight-lipped about it, even though even Chris wouldn't say anything. Sleep that night was fitful, with blokes whispering and conjecturing. Des must have run out of TNT, because Ravelli was a casual affair. Out on the road in two ranks as usual, but it was run down to the sneaker ranges where we were detailed to dismantle the dart mechanisms and haul them out on the road. This was a four-man job, and we could have done with big wheelbarrows. We took a few hours to retrieve the mechs and associated star pickets, figure 11 targets, and recondition the bush as best we could, filling in holes in the main. The truck was loaded 20-odd mechanisms and sent off to head back to Swanbourne ASAP after lunch. Once the staff were satisfied we'd done the best job we could, including picking up brass, we formed up for the trudge back up to the camp for late breakfast. Back at the camp, there seemed to be movement, but in that, the store's tent had been taken down, and the Q-store truck was in the process of being loaded also. So the furphy was true. We were packing up and heading back to tomorrow. We would pack the rest of the camp tomorrow, fill in the latrine, pull down the wash point, and collect all the rubbish in sandbags. We had one last task, a small night NAVEX. We were given a set of bearings and legs, and we would work in pairs. Each pair was issued a torch and spare batteries and 25 set radio with CES. It was literally a toss-up on who would carry it. We went back to the lines to prep. The camp would be the start and finish points with 500-metre legs in 4 directions. The way we went with our map, compass, radio, and torch, each leg should take about 1 hour, with everyone due back at 10 p.m. The radios were purely for safety and to call in at each checkpoint. I was with GD on this thing, and he was funny man, and he cracked jokes the whole time. Shut the fuck up, GD. We've got a job to do, I said. GD. He quietened down a little, just enough to allow the concentration to take over. They're very wet in the bush, and before long, we were soaked. The checkpoints were easy enough to find, and before long, we could hear the camp generator and see the lights were among the first in. We dropped the radio and gear along with the torch, and the very welcome hot brew was ready at Grumpy's kitchen. The friendly banter from staff and students alike. We had to wait till all groups were in case we were needed for a search party, although we needn't have worried because all groups and checkpoints people were in within the 4 hours. Jock then briefed us on what and where for the next few days. We would pack up this camp tomorrow and head back to Swanbourne. We would then overnight at Swanbourne before boarding trucks with our field gear and head to Bindoon, an army camp about 50 miles north. A restful night with no grog.
All right. Okay. End of chapter. So that was the chapter 6 from Two Ranks in the Road, 35 Years of Australian Special Forces Service by Michael J. Malone, as read by the author. So a lot's changed. That was a long one. Thanks for the listeners for sticking in there. It's a longish chapter, 13 pages, I think. There'll be a couple of those long ones. So, and we're going to try and do a chapter per episode rather than breaking them up. So, but there's a lot that went on at Collie. You learnt a lot. It feels like you went away boys and came back men a little bit.
Certainly did.
And so, yeah.
The basics had to be learned. And we really had no idea. We'd covered a bit of it at Kapuka and IFSA, but we were now working in the teams that we'd be working in Vietnam.
Yeah.
6-man patrols.
And then all the things that you learnt there, you actually used them when you were
Well,
in
yeah,
Vietnam.
yeah, absolutely.
And I guess it's I mean, no one's shooting at you. That's the
Well, that
difference.
changes everything. It changes everything. The old two-way range.
Hmm.
Um,
But this it really gives a really vivid picture of the variety of stuff that you're doing, because you mentioned early on that there's the interminable marching up and down, which you can never quite figure out what the point was. But once you get into Collie, it feels like every day you've got a new challenge, a new thing you're learning. You're learning on the fly, uh,
yeah,
um, and
freezing cold, pouring rain.
yeah, and the thing that's really that I like to read about it is that the blokes who were running the course were aware of the fact that you're all kids learning and pulling you aside and giving you tips and encouragement and sending you back in there. No one's
Yeah,
getting thrown out on their ear for making a mistake,
no,
except for Larry, who
no.
who
Yeah.
for the first time reading it today, I thought, was Larry a plant? Was Larry sent in there to misbehave like that to keep you all on the straight and narrow? But
Oh, you can imagine.
yeah, probably not. But yeah, so lots of good stuff in there. I like that at the beginning of the chapter, he starts out at the Grotto, which was that legendary place at the Campbell Barracks, the Great Wick Club, and all the the chaos that went on there. The Diggers Boozer.
Oh, mate, fabulous place.
Yeah, that was a site of my childhood. That was a that was a location that we heard about often about the Grotto, and it's still going. Big, if you're ever
Oh,
up
yeah,
at Campbell
big
Barracks,
time.
the word the Grotto painted on the side, and
Yeah, yeah, oh, great.
yeah,
Important.
yeah,
Percy Grappley, of course.
yeah, and then we read in that chapter the first trip down south along Marine Parade, and from when I was a teenager, I always remember every time we would go south in Perth, you would always insist that we go to Marine Parade and drive down the coast. And that was always a priority for you
Yeah,
because there are quicker ways to get down to Fremantle, but you'd always want to go down the coast road for that
I even
reason.
do that today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's and I do the same thing whenever I'm back in Perth. There's always you always prioritize going towards the ocean if you can.
Yeah.
So does the regiment still train in Collie? Is it they still use that area? Is it mostly been done now?
Sometimes I think they're mainly in the Stirling Mountains down further south, uh, and overseas. They do a
Right.
lot of overseas work. New Guinea, Samoa, places like that. So they're right in the deep end of all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know much about what goes on in the regiment these days, needless
Yeah.
to say.
Fair enough.
Gone from the highest clearance, security clearance, to zero.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a different place. We were there in April for Anzac Day this year, and it's a very different. I remember when I was a kid, I used to be able to ride my bike in the front gate and just wave at the guard and then go in and swim in the
Yeah.
swimming pool. And now it's gates and passcodes and all sorts of things getting around. I mean, for good reason. For good reason, obviously. I had my wedding reception at the SAS house. I had my 18th birthday party at the officers' mess. All my scaly mates wandering around wandering around Campbell Barracks. You couldn't do that anymore, obviously. In a
No.
different time. So yeah, so lots of fun stuff in that chapter. The Reveille Des style is also a fun story of him just setting off a slab of explosives to wake everyone up.
Oh, God.
It's something you don't recover from, just that.
You're so used to it after a while, but he'd go off in the bush with a slab of TNT, which is about a kilo, about that big,
Yeah.
and a detonator. Pull the plug, basically start walking back towards the lines, and boom, up you go.
That'll
God.
get that'll get you out of bed better than an alarm clock.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that came up in that chapter is that you got stuck on the DART. He said, "What does DART stand for?" So one thing that the book has is that if you're ever reading the book and you're never sure about what something means, is we have a pretty good glossary in the back, and so DART is defined in the glossary as the disappearing automatic retaliatory target.
What's it called?
Disappearing automatic retaliatory target.
Yes, I knew that.
Yeah, and so sometimes there are acronyms used or abbreviations that kind of assume military knowledge. But if you're a non-military reader,
Yeah.
that glossary in the back could be useful, and I'm sure we'll touch on it again.
Oh, the glossary is a work of art, mate.
Well, it was important. We had a couple of civvies read the draft, and they were often saying, "But what does this mean? I don't know what this means." And your response was, "Oh, well, it's for the military reader, but of course, there's going to be plenty of people reading who weren't in the regiment, and so it's important to be able to make it clear to every reader." So that was a really useful addition by having that glossary to say
Yeah.
head to the back if you're not sure. And then, of course, we have our first real appearance in this chapter of the title of the book, Two Ranks, heading out in the bush, two ranks on the road,
Yeah.
running down the bush track in Collie. And so this is the real formative moment here for you.
People say to me, why is two ranks? Why isn't three ranks? I said, because the Collie bush track had two ranks, two tracks. That was it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So it's good. It's a memorable title.
yeah, it is a good title.
Yeah. So that's great. It's a long chapter, so a long episode. So we'll leave it there. But yeah, we've seen our time in Collie, and the next episode we'll be heading up to Bindoon to see the second half of the Carter. So yeah, lots of fun to be had. So that is all the time we have this week for Never Die Wondering. Join us next week for the next installment of our exploration of Mick Malone's career as we get into the seventh chapter of the book itself, titled SAS Cadre Bindoon. If you have a copy of Two Ranks, read along with us. I've been Toby Malone, and thank you to Mick Malone for wholeheartedly joining me on this journey.
Vaya con Dios.
This has been Never Die Wondering, Mick Malone in his own words. For links to purchase your own copies of Mick's books, visit the show notes or mickmalone.com.au. This podcast is produced by Toby Malone, Joe Malone, and Mick Malone, and engineered by Toby Malone. Theme music is The Happy Wanderer, the official SAS march, as reimagined by Cormac Malone and Meg Logue Malone. Yes, this is a family affair. This is a GM production in association with Imprimatur Books.